Hey everyone, welcome to the live edition of Jim's weekly rankings. We're going to go quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, talk about some of the guys that might be a little bit undervalued, or at least we're not discussing enough when it comes to the weekly rankings for each position. So I want to dive right in, Jim, and it's a breaking news item that we need to discuss. Although, if you had read through the tea leaves on Monday, I'm not sure you should be all that surprised. Nico Collins was placed in injured reserve. Now, probably the more impactful part of this is that the Texans typically wait till, or, sorry, Texans. NFL teams typically wait till Saturday to make these transactions. So I guess it's good on the fantasy atmosphere, good for the fantasy environment that the Texans chose to announce this information. Nico Collins on injured reserve. When a player goes from day to day, downgraded week to week, and that happens over a 24-hour span, and we hear the week-to-week news on Monday, Jim, I don't want to be a Nostradamus of bad news, but it felt like this could possibly happen. So Nico Collins on injured reserve. Let's start with the Texans receivers first. Obviously, there's Stephon Diggs, who's been Mr. Reliable, shockingly so, at least to my mind. And then Tank Dell, who's been a massive disappointment relative to his fantasy value, especially if you were underdog, for example, and was a third or fourth round pick. So how do you anticipate those two receivers looking? And then is there somebody else that managers should be going to get with Nico Collins out for the next 4 weeks?
First of all, Nico Collins is irreplaceable in that offense. He is the premier cover two buster, or the two high shell buster, because what he does is he is big, he is fast, and he runs those angled routes over the second level where the linebackers are at. That, and if you have a quarterback that is willing to rip the ball into that area, between that and having a big, fast, physical receiver, that is the antidote to beating the two high shells. And that is going to be sorely missed because there's not a player on their roster capable of doing that. Stephon Diggs clearly is still a good player, but he is not that type of player. Tank Dell is what I call a stretch Z receiver. He's a perimeter possession receiver with downfield deep speed. And first of all, in terms of this one's important for fantasy managers. When Tank Dell was out 2 weeks ago, Robert Woods was his replacement, playing 72% of the snaps. When Nico Collins went out last week, Xavier Hutchinson came into his role and took over the remaining 71% of the snaps in that game. So it is an apples for apples thing. So I'm saying don't prioritize Robert Woods. I don't think Xavier Hutchinson is going to, lift the lid off of defenses, but he is going to move into that role. Now, Hutchinson was targeted 3 times, caught 2 for 31. So there's that, but he's going to be integrated into the game plan. Again, he's not Nico Collins. He's not putting up Nico Collins numbers. But if you're scraping the barrel for a wide receiver 3-ish, probably more of a flex, you're kind of looking right there. That's where I'm going to start first. And we can talk to the other players. Let's discuss a little more here.
Yeah. And you had mentioned what's the antidote for the cover 2 look or the 2 high safeties, a big, fast receiver. Well, Nico Collins wasn't Nico Collins until CJ Stroud was a thing. Xavier Hutchinson is big, right? 6'4", 6'5", relatively fast for his size too. I am not saying Xavier Hutchinson is Nico Collins, but nobody thought Nico Collins outside of Mario and John, who've been on Nico Collins since in Michigan. Yes. Gosh, I can't forget you, Jim. Thank you. Yes. And Jim as well with that. It's entirely possible that with a quarterback as good as CJ Stroud and the upcoming matchups for the Texans, which are, I think, at least favorable in certain instances, that Xavier Hutchinson could be a thing in deeper leagues. And I'm not saying your friends and family league or your work league where it's 10 teams, but you and I play in the stake league, for example, a deep 14 teams, shallow bench spaces. There's a lot of guys available that you have to stream or whatever else. We play in a lot of different formats, or like the NFFC, for example, where it's 12 teams but 20 roster spots. I think Xavier Hutchinson is worth a pickup as well, too. And again, like you mentioned, Robert Woods is not the direct replacement. It's a who fits what the offense needs by that position. Xavier Hutchinson, kind of a 1-for-1 in that body type and speed archetype. We'll see if talent is the same 1-for-1 sort of situation in the coming 4 weeks. Again, Nico Collins on injured reserve, out for at least the next month. Okay, so no Robert Woods makes total sense to me. Let's go to the quarterbacks and let's follow up with this. How does this impact CJ Stroud? Because I had talked about it on SiriusXM yesterday. I had mentioned on the podcast with Jake too, and I have CJ Stroud in stake league, so it's been on my mind. I'm a little bit worried that you look at CJ Stroud's rest of season numbers with Nico Collins out, and he is going to fall well outside quarterback 7, 8, 9, where I thought he was going to be very conventionally landing, if not a little bit higher. Like this could be a bit of a dire spot for CJ Stroud now for the next month.
It is. Remember this. In the regular season last year, now 5 games this year, CJ Stroud has 1 game with more than 2 touchdown passes. That's not great for fantasy. Now, the yardage has a pair of 300-yard games back-to-back against Jacksonville, Buffalo. There's that. But realistically, this offense is in trouble. CJ Stroud's in trouble for fantasy. Maybe he figures out a way to win NFL because their defense is coming around. I'm going to give him that. But all that said, yes, you're probably not getting those over 2 touchdown games because we haven't seen them, and we're not going to likely see them unless there's a fluke thing going on. CJ Stroud's going to be limited here because remember, I harped and crowed when they cut all 3 of their fullbacks. That was a big deal because in that Slowick offense, which is the Shanahan offense, which is a Mike McDaniel in Miami offense, having a fullback on the field always allowed the defense to spin down a safety and you could go over the top. That's why Tank Dell was so successful last year because there was room. They have no fullbacks. They're going a 3-receiver offense. Teams are playing the too high shell on them. They're not going to give them explosives unless you have a player like Nico who can win underneath between the second and the third level. They don't have that now. So CJ Stroud's going to have to do what Patrick Mahomes does, what Josh Allen does. They're going to have to hunt the middle and short areas of the field, and they're going to have to run 17, 18 play drives to try to get the ball down the field. That's going to be a tough sell because Tank Dell is not a big physical receiver. He's not going to have room over the top. Maybe once in a while he sneaks past for sure. Stephon Diggs is certainly not a game breaker at this point. This is going to become a very, very, I hate to use the word dink and dunk, but they're going to be forced into that now. And they really are going to need Joe Mixon healthy because they really need him to churn out some yardage. And I don't know if he had a setback from his injury because he had practice a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know if that was a re-injury. And if that is, that's a problem.
Well, when I hear dink and dunk, I'm hearing Dalton Schultz. I mean, that's his career at this point, whether it be the Cowboys or Texans. So I'm not trying to bounce around a little bit, but is Dalton Schultz now a guy that bumps up the rankings with Nico out?
100%. Because I had said going into the season, when you've got Collins, Dell, and Diggs, you can't draw plays for Dalton Schultz. There's only so many passes to go around. And I said his targets are going to take a hit. And look, he had 3, 3, 5, 5. Those are fine, but they're not earth breaking. He did have 6 last week, but that's what Nico Collins missing 3/4 of the game. So yes, I think Dalton Schultz now goes back into that tight end 1 category because that's where they're going to have to live. So he's going to get 4 catches, 5 catches in a lot of games. So yeah, prioritize him if he's somehow on waivers.
Real quick, Andy Seward asked, would you prioritize Juju Smith-Schuster or Xavier Hutchinson in a full-point PPR? I think I know my answer to this, but I'm curious, Jim, where you're at with it.
So if you follow all of our RotoWire videos, last Wednesday, I did my sneaky starts for the week. And I only list 5 players, 1 at each position in a wild card. Juju Smith-Schuster is a player I sung through the roof. I said it very easy. They need a possession receiver with Rashee Rice gone. They don't have a possession receiver on the roster except for Juju Smith-Schuster. Smith-Schuster had 7 games with over 70 yards through week 14 in 2022 when he was with Mahomes. And then obviously we saw him go over 100 and there's some blown coverages and this and that and the other. But Smith-Schuster is going to see targets. And unless they trade, which they could, Kansas City could trade for a receiver, but I don't know if they're going to. And if right now, as it stands, Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be their possession guy the rest of the season. So I prioritize him way over Hutchinson, who's hopefully it's only 4 weeks. Now, I don't know. They put him on IR so fast. I hope it's only 4 weeks, but it's probably not a season ender.
Yeah, I don't think it's and I had made the case again on a couple different platforms yesterday. Given Nico Collins' name brand value, the Texans were a Super Bowl favorite for a lot of folks. If Nico Collins was done for the season, one of the Schefters or Rappaports of the world, Jordan Schultz's, would have gotten that information somehow. They would have exchanged their soul for that little tidbit that they can tweet out in 5 minutes. So I don't think that you're seeing Nico Collins placed on injured reserve. I'm sorry, out for the season, but that it was such an immediate one. Again, teams typically just wait till Saturday to make that sort of designation, even though if it's been announced before, that is a little bit of pause for concern. And how it went from day to day to week to injured reserve in the span of 72 hours is certainly notable. We're trending to a different part of a show here, but I'll ask one more because Jalen Tolbert was on the top of my waiver wire list among receivers. So if we're throwing Juju Smith-Schuster into that mix, Jalen Tolbert and then Xavier Hutchinson, are you ranking it Juju, Tolbert, Hutchinson, or where does Hutchinson rank in that equation?
You know, Jalen Tolbert. Now look, he had 2 big games And then he had a couple of meh games. Cooks is on the IR. He's going to miss at least a few more weeks. So as to what we're going to expect from Jalen Tolbert, I think it's going to be up and down. But at this point, he has every opportunity to become the clear number 2 receiver in this offense, and they have to pass. And I know Rico Dowdle's a nice story. He's getting his 4 yards a carry, but he's no explosive element, and they're going to have to throw the ball. So I think Jalen Tolbert is probably somebody in a pass-heavy offense. I think Juju has to go ahead of him because I think he's going to see regular targets with Mahomes, but Tolbert is definitely a close number 2 because he's going to have 3 more weeks to firmly entrench himself as part of that offense.
Yeah, it feels kind of like a 1A and 1C situations. If you want to say Juju Smith-Schuster's 1A, there's a 1B gap, but then Tolbert would be 1C because the Cowboys offense has to pass, right? It's Zeke and Rico Dowdle aren't going to be able to run the ball. Like if you're saying one team rest of the season will confidently throw 40 times a game, I would bet the Cowboys, and I would bet a lot of money. Maybe they won't quite get to 40, but that's what they're going to have to do. So if you're passing the ball 40 times a game, it can't be 20 to CeeDee Lamb and can't be 20 to Jake Ferguson.
Nope.
Tolbert by default benefits a lot in that scenario. Again, we're doing weekly rankings, but there's a few questions in the chat that I thought were at least important to kind of contextualize for this. And real quick with the quarterbacks, Jim, the breaking news of yesterday was that the Patriots are turning to their rookie quarterback, Drake May. Didn't give us in our show sheet, but I know you're professional on this stuff. How do you think the Patriots offense benefits now that Drake May's your starting quarterback? And I had made the case with Jake, and Jake was pushing back a little bit on the Tuesday waiver wire show, that DeMario Douglas now becomes a far more attractive name to me than he was at any other point in the season. Is DeMario Douglas in this waiver wire equation of sorts for a full point PPR format?
Man, you know what? That offensive line is an abject disaster in New England, and it's borderline irresponsible to put a rookie quarterback behind there. Jacoby Brissett was taking a beating. He was taking way too many hits. Drake May looks to run. We saw him play like a series, I think, at the end of a Monday night game, maybe a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was I can't remember the
3
game.
weeks ago. Yep.
3 weeks ago. But I remember, he
got sacked twice.
Against the Jets,
he got sacked twice in that game in the one series.
They are not going to have a passing offense. Jacoby Brissett is a professional quarterback. He may not be a great quarterback, but he's a professional quarterback. Just like with Brissett, there's going to be games where Douglas gets his. If they're smart, you dump the ball out quick. And if that's the case, that's DeMario Douglas. Now, he plays a slot, so DeMario Douglas is not a full-time player. So there's that. Now, New England's defense in games that they keep it close, and remember, Kendrick Bourne is back. He got his first game action.
He was off the injured reserve last week or last Saturday. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So he played 27% of the snaps, but that's working him back, and he'll be a part. And he's a short area of the field guy too. But DeMario Douglas, we've seen him with 2 9-target games in the last 3 weeks, but his snaps, he has one game over 67% of the snaps. But like you said, in a PPR league, I think they're going to have to design this offense to keep that quarterback, Drake May, from being leveled, and getting it out quick is the answer. So I think DeMario Douglas has a lot of high floor PPR value. There's no ceiling. This team isn't scoring a lot of points. There are not going to be many 20-point games. But I think if you're looking 5 catches, 60 yards, things like that, I think DeMario Douglas can get that in the majority of his remaining games.
I kind of think of it like last year's Deontay Johnson Steeler days. And you're like, wow, Deontay Johnson's a really good slot receiver. That's fantastic. No. Deontay Johnson was handicapped in that Steelers offense. Like there was like the ceiling of 12 points. You knew he was never going to score a touchdown for whatever the reason, because the Steelers offense was weird like that. And that kind of is the concept. But the difference is Deontay Johnson was drafted in the 6th or 7th round last year for the Steelers, whereas DeMario Douglas is probably widely available everywhere. We're entering a heavy bye week stretch. Of course, we had 4 last week, 4 this week. You have the London games as well, too. There are going to be instances where getting a 10 or 11 point floor at a flex is a really attractive thing in a full point PPR. And I think DeMario Douglas is worth rostering in that same sort of context. But just to bring it up, because we had the breaking news with Drake May and of course Nico Collins again on injured reserve for the Texans. I'm seeing a few questions related to start sit in the chat. I just want to remind folks that Jim does about a 15-hour show on Sundays, getting you all set for every one of those start sit questions. You answer probably 400, I feel like, in that 2-hour stretch. I'm exaggerating the time, but I understand that you are running frankly a marathon, even though it's a 2-hour portion of that, doing all that on Sunday. So we'll direct most of those questions to when Jim is on live, the RotoWire YouTube channel on Sundays. And of course, you doing that show with Alan as well, too. Hopefully he's all set with his Florida home over the coming days, too. But just a reminder that most of those start sit questions we'll be addressing during Jim's time on the Sunday rankings. And just so everyone else knows, you can look at some of these rankings for Jeff Erickson, for example, on RotoWire's site, rotowire.com/try. You can see 48-hour access to the site. You can see all those articles. You can see my big betting sheet, which will be posting, in probably 2 or 3 hours here. I got that mostly done last night. So a lot of different ways to view Jim's content, my content, everything else. RotoWire.com/try gets you that 48-hour access to the site. I want to make sure we're spending enough time on the other positions, Jim, so we'll move past the quarterbacks and let's get to the running backs. Tony Pollard has been divisive, I think polarizing from a fantasy value for much of the season. Of course, the Titans now on a bye. We'll see if Will Levis is your starting quarterback for Tennessee when they face off against the Colts this week. Will Levis did not start practicing. He was removed from that Monday game because he was hurt. And if you're asking me, I think that was because he was just bad. And they're like, well, wait, if I just got a floor play like Mason Rudolph, can I win my lineups? And I think that's how the Titans are looking at things too. Again, Will Levis is still technically listed as the starter, but I think that shoulder injury might prolong a little bit longer for the Titans to see what they have with Mason Rudolph. Does Rudolph change the equation for Tony Pollard? Does the Titans offense change if it's Rudolph as the quarterback? Like, how do you have Pollard ranked this week?
So Tony Pollard, look, he has had a very, very good season. He had one bad game against Green Bay. And in that game, 29 yards, 3 catches. So it's 5.9 PPR points. But he has been in double digits every week PPR. He had a 15-point game against the Jets. That's not bad. Blew up against the Bears. Actually blew up against Miami. Tony Pollard's playing very, very good football right now. The blocking, I see it as adequate from the offensive line. They're not running people over with the offensive line, but they are not getting him in trouble. He has room to run. And regardless of quarterback, defenses are not game planning saying, oh my gosh, Will Levis is in. So the game planning by defenses is really no different. Mason Rudolph will gunsling a little bit too. And that's kind of what Levis will do. So I don't know that there's much of a change. Rudolph might be more averse to mistakes because Levis makes so many.
Right.
So the receivers, look, it's a disaster there. Because there's no George Pickens like there was for Mason Rudolph last year down the stretch. There's no George Pickens here.
Couldn't Hopkins be that a little bit? I mean, like it's different ball games. Like Pickens is going to take a 6-yard slant and run 70 yards. He'll also give up on the route entirely, not do anything, as we saw last week against the Cowboys. But Hopkins can operate as that safety net that I think George Pickens was for Mason Rudolph, because this guy is going to run 12 yards down the field, but if I throw it in this precise window, Hopkins has got a wide radius to be able to catch that relative to Calvin Ridley, who'd be the other one that you're like, well, maybe he makes a factor, and I have no idea.
Joe, with Hopkins, it's interesting because we've seen even his snap share is low, 32% last week. He had a pair of games in the 40% range. He's not a full-time player right now. And he's way past the point of that preseason knee injury. I mean, that was a 4 to 6 week injury, and that was in early August. Well, we're more than 2 months out from that already. And so he's a 32-year-old possession receiver. Great hands. If they get the ball in the red zone, certainly want to throw it to him. But DeAndre Hopkins just can't make plays anymore. I mean, not like the way. I mean, he's so far removed from the player he was. He had so much talent that he could afford to age and lose a lot and still be a productive NFL player. But he's certainly not a player that could come in and just like run an offense anymore. So it's tough with him. He's gonna be a PPR special. That'll be. I mean, I could see him getting 4 or 5 catches in a lot of games because the reliability. He's where he's supposed to be, and that's real important for a young quarterback. Right. But I just don't see a whole lot of upside. I think this offense is not going to score many points. It's been that way all year, but it's a bit of a problem.
Backtracking, but it's why I want Drake May to be successful. I was arguing with a few friends earlier yesterday when it was announced that May was the starter, and you had kind of said it as well and alluded to that it's almost irresponsible to put it behind that offensive line because it's so bad. And I was like, well, remember the Texans offensive line was really bad to start the year last year, and CJ Stroud ended up doing well, and no one would have known more than 2 names for the Commanders offensive line, but Jaden Daniels is looking well. And then I actually went and looked at the Patriots offensive line chart, and I'm like, I study football all the time. This is my job. I'm doing 50, 60 hours a week. I hardly knew any of the starters for the Patriots. Like David Andrews is on injured reserve. I knew David Andrews, but right. So this is a step below the offensive line. I want Drake May to look good because I want more good offenses in the league. I want less Titans, less Jacoby Brissett Patriots offenses. It's more fun for me and you to talk about football when we're excited about these offenses, but we have to see it. And of course, Hopkins is one good game. Now going back to the Titans, was when he was on a 5'10" corner in Jair Alexander, who he can just kind of dunk the ball over. If those matchups are there consistently, that's fine. But with a guy that is, I think this was reported, I believe this is true, dealing with an MCL tear, which does not just like recover. You're going to have surgery at the end of the year, but you can play on it. Yeah, you're sapped of any sort of elusiveness or strength to run fast routes, and you're resigned to, here's a 12-yard out. I'm going to just jump ball this every time. That's not a functioning offense, no matter if it's Will Levis or Mason Rudolph throwing the ball. So Pollard, this is where we started with this. Pollard's going to be fine because the workload and opportunities. Tajay Spears is still a factor. We'll have to see if Mason Rudolph elevates that offense anymore, and I think the answer is probably no. What do we do with the Jacksonville backfield? Because we've had now multiple weeks where Travis Etienne, Doug Peterson, he's the starter. Don't worry about it, guys. I love Travis Etienne. I'm not pissed that Urban Meyer took him in the first round. I would never want to have that happen. But this Tank Bigsby guy, he had one of the worst rookie years of all time among rookie running backs, but I like him a lot too. And we're going to be splitting the backfield. And now we've had multiple weeks where Tank Bigsby clearly looks more explosive, more impactful. Yeah, that screen pass that was schemed for Tank Bigsby as well too. What are we supposed to make with both these players?
So first of all, look, this isn't a fantasy thing. This is real football. Etienne is a much, much, much better running back, but given the bad offensive line, what Etienne needs is an offensive line because he's one to navigate, find a hole, get there, and then make nice moves from there. They're not getting that. Tank Bigsby's a no-nonsense downhill runner. Sometimes when you don't have a good offensive line, just being decisive and running with power and authority, sometimes that's the difference. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing Bigsby is running hard, and that's helping out. It's helping the offense. Not that they're doing great things in Jacksonville. So we've known since the first year Etienne regularly played, first year he missed because of a broken foot. But after then, we always saw when he'd get work, they'd immediately scale it back. And so they've made it a real point to limit his work. And he doesn't have a game, Etienne, with more than 13 carries. So that is something that has been the case. Now, the 6 last week, I know he was dealing with his shoulder going into the game, but it sounded like he was fine. He looked fine. But right now, it looks like Bigsby is going to see at least as many early down carries and maybe more. Etienne's going to probably be more of a receiving back. And he does have a 6 and a 7 target game in the last 3 weeks. So I think that's the split. I think Tank Bigsby has a minimum of flex value right now. But if he continues to break off big runs, certainly he could get to that low end running back 2 range. But he's going to be very limited as a receiver. He had 1 catch for 28 yards last week, but he's pretty much a nothing in the pass game. So if he doesn't find the end zone, he's going to be like he's going to have a very limited ceiling. That's going to be the problem. But again, he scored twice last week, so there's that. But that's not going to be a common occurrence.
We get to do this because we're fantasy professionals, Jim, and it's fun to talk about silly things that might not happen. But the Jaguars are 1-4. Probably shouldn't have even won against the Colts last week, or at least it was a close contest that between two kind of not very good teams. Is it possible that the Jaguars would consider trading Travis Etienne maybe to the Dallas Cowboys, for example, or another team that needs a running back? And in that event, does Tank Bigsby become somebody that you'd assume takes all the work, or would they do this Texans thing with Dare Gumbawale factoring with Cam Akers? There's a lot of different directions it could go if Etienne were to be traded. And if I'm Jacksonville, looking at where things are, all the money that's been invested in my receiving core, and probably a regime change if things continue on this way, cashing out on Etienne and getting something for him might not be a bad idea.
It's a tough call, Joe. It's a good question. The thing is, if the GM kind of sees the writing on the wall, which he better, that Peterson's going to be gone sooner than later. And if that's the case, you really want Etienne there for a new coach. Because if you bring in a coach with any idea of an offense, Travis Etienne's part of the solution. He's not part of the problem. It's a Doug Peterson thing. You know what? Like I said earlier, the offensive line's not great, and I mentioned all the reasons why Etienne's not doing well. You figure out a way. You can make it work for him. You could change different run schemes. I don't think they trade him. I think they see him as part of their long-term solution, not their short-term woes. And also, remember this, Joe. I know in free agency, teams spent up for running backs this year, but realistically, the league still devalues running backs. And to give up valuable draft assets for a running back, normally it's not worth making the trade because you're really not going to get a lot in return. It's just the nature of the market. I don't think anybody's giving up anything of a valuable pick for a running back, especially knowing he's already well into his rookie deal. And Was because he missed that first year. So is this his third or his fourth year?
Well, I think this would be we could literally look. We're on the computer, but I thought this was his fourth year. So you'd have the fifth year option as a first round receiver, or sorry, running back, and then you'd be able to have Etienne just brought back on a relative contract, or you extend him kind of like a David Montgomery deal. I don't think you'd go quite for 3 for 6, so 3 for 18.
So
But Etienne going 3 for 30. That's not that crazy, and probably is a bit of an overpay given his mark. But I just look at like the Chiefs, for example. Does the Chiefs three-peat Super Bowl window open up if they trade a fifth-round pick for Travis Etienne? My answer is probably yes. And I know Kareem Hunt's been pretty good, and you have Carson Steele as a thing, and Edwards-Helaire could come back. Like maybe it isn't overkill, but if I'm the Chiefs, what's a fifth-round pick if that means I can cement myself in the history of the NFL more than I already have? For the Cowboys, for example, who have been just desperately needing a running back, like you can kind of go down this list and say a fifth-round pick for X running back that makes a difference, like Etienne, provided he's healthy. And the provided he's healthy might be the real issue with this question, because I do think that's legitimate, even if it's Doug Peterson kind of messing things up.
when you mentioned the Chiefs, well, already remember this: the Chiefs had their bye this week. Pacheco's already 4 weeks into his injury, and they're 5-0. He's coming back. That's not even a question, I think. Even if he misses the full 8. So what's the worst case scenario? They come out of 10 games at 8-2. They're like the 49ers. They're only thinking playoffs. They're not thinking regular season. So I think they would not make that move. And we know their salary cap's a mess. I mean, obviously, because they're paying Mahomes a ton of money, and they've made it a point to not bring in people. And they let Tyreek Hill go. I mean, that was all part of the master plan, and that they thought they could piece everything together. And this is the fourth year of Etienne. The first year he didn't play because of the foot. So I assume they picked him as fifth year option. So that's the end of his deal. So realistically, if a team's going to give up any compensation for him, they would have to pay him to keep him long term. And I don't see him as a rental type player. I don't think like baseball, I don't think they're making those rental deals.
Yeah, well, and it's funny you bring up the baseball analogy. The Chiefs are focused on the postseason. You're right, but I might just want a starting pitcher for my roster to get me through the regular season, and maybe Etienne is worth that. Again, if I'm Jacksonville, what's the point of trading him for a fifth round pick if he is part of the future? But if you are eyeing up, say, Bill Belichick, who I believe I saw on, it's probably one of those fakey odd things. Not that I want to throw any of our competitors or friends under the bus, but a fakey odds thing that said Bill Belichick's next landing spot is now higher for Jacksonville. I kind of like that. Shad Khan loves to make those big moves. Again, the assumption is Doug Peterson is gone, whether he's a walking head coach fired or if there's a propped up scenario where he is just the guy for the next windfall, whatever it is. I wouldn't like Bill Belichick would not care to have Etienne. Like that wouldn't be valuable to him in that instance. And we'll have to see. Like you mentioned, the GM for Jacksonville is certainly gone as well too after this year. So just something to think about when we have a little bit more time with this stuff. And I guess real quick with that, with the running back situation now, Derek Carr, we're talking about quarterbacks, ironically, for a lot of these different spots. Derek Carr out for the foreseeable future, suffered an oblique injury. I guess I had blinked and missed it in that Monday night game. Although if you were watching that Monday game, you probably were sleeping for large portions of it because it was boring, as it seems to be every time with the Chiefs. Derek Carr out for the foreseeable future. You had Jake Haener look okay. Does that make Alvin Kamara have fantasy value? Does that raise his fantasy value or lower it, I guess I should say?
I mean, Kamara is seeing an insane workload, and dumping the ball off them is probably a big, big focus as it's been. He's getting targets. He's getting carries. Look, with what I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. I don't think they've committed to Haener or Rattler because there's talk that Rattler could start too. So I have no idea who will really be the starter. Haener came in as the number 2, but I don't think they definitively said. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I don't think they have. And regardless, it's not going to be a good situation. Haener runs. Haener's very mobile. So there's that. Rattler would be somebody that would potentially throw the ball, but again, where he was drafted, it's probably not going to be much there. But Kamara is going to be the workhorse. Defense are going to be gunning for him, but volume is king in fantasy football. And he could catch 6 or 7 passes in games. I don't know how many points they're going to be scoring. I think, and I know we're not talking about receivers now. Rashid Shaheed's in trouble because Derek Carr is able to throw it downfield to him. I really don't. I mean, Olave's in trouble for that matter. So yeah, I think
doesn't it feel like a worse scenario of like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle with whatever scrubs were playing at quarterback for the Dolphins? Like, I mean, I'm very invested in Chris Olave, I'm ready to move off anything at this point. If you're saying Derek Carr is going to be out for the next 4 weeks, like that, this could get real ugly for the New Orleans Saints.
It is, and again, we're talking Derek Carr here. It's not, now we're not talking
Right,
Joe
it's not
Burrow,
Tua.
but man, Derek Carr was getting it done in that offense, though. He was doing well. The rollouts, the boots, the play action, it was helpful. They were producing. And I know he had a couple down games compared to what he had to start the season, but still was a functional offense. And yeah, I think right now, Haener and Rattler, I don't think that's a functional offense because remember, that offensive line is a lot of issues. And there's only so much you can do with smoke and mirrors. Smoke and mirrors
Right.
and Derek Carr is one thing. Smoke and mirrors and Rattler or Haener, that's a complete another story.
Yeah, I know you're an incredibly hip guy, Jim, but I think you'll hear speculation on Spencer Rattler, because he was a highly touted high school prospect into college, but also because Spencer Rattler was on a pretty hit Netflix TV show. Rattler did not look good in that, but I think that's where the name brand recognition of a third string quarterback comes from relative to the rest of the NFL. So if you're hearing things on Spencer Rattler, Jim, it's because Netflix. You can always blame Netflix for everything wrong in the world.
And one thing, Mike Garafolo and Ian Rappaport did report on Tuesday. Rattler's viewed as a strong candidate to start Sunday against the Buccaneers with Carr expected to miss games. So again, if somebody was like scratching for a quarterback in the waiver wire, we don't know right now. They'll practice today. We'll see who takes first team reps or if they split them equally. But that will be very interesting to see who actually is the quarterback here.
Again, Saints offense looking kind of putrid. So I'll turn the question around back to the running back position. Buccaneers play them this week. Of course, they lost disappointing Thursday game. I don't even know how they lost, Jim. I literally is inconceivable to me. And I've watched my Milwaukee Brewers and Bucks lose games that they should never, ever lose consistently in my life. And yet I'm still shocked at how the Buccaneers pull it off. You would think that they're able to sit on the ball, whether BJ Kaner or Spencer Rattler from the Saints quarterback situation, and be successful and just be able to run the ball with Bucky Irving and Rashad White. And yet I'm a little bit nervous to play at least Rashad White, if not Bucky Irving too, if I had to.
The Saints are at home. The Saints are a really good defense. Look, the Chiefs, my question was, and I put this on Twitter, how many 2 and 3 tight end sets would we see in that game? Because it was like one of those questions saying they're going to be loading up. They were running 4 tight end sets, the Chiefs.
Right.
And what defense is an answer for that? I think about that. That's like basically 9 offensive linemen on the field. And okay, what are you going to do? You're going to have these little safeties come in, and one of those is going to be a weak spot. And they're going to run it down your throats. Kansas City is insanely smart. Well, the Buccaneers don't have that level of offense in them. Saints are at home. Saints are a good defense. They're probably going to step up as much as they can, knowing Carr is out. And Derek Carr said this, and not Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield said this earlier in the season. If he's under pressure, it's a problem. The 3 games he wasn't under pressure, he looks like a superstar. Saints are not a lights out pressure defense, but they're way better than they were the last 2 years. They are getting pressure on the quarterback. Gets me a little bit concerned. And of course, we have Mike Evans and the Marshawn Lattimore thing that they've always gone at it. And Evans hasn't had his best games against Lattimore. So all that said, this could be a very, very low scoring game, but I would not necessarily say wheels up on the Buccaneers offense here. Saints at home. And they're familiar with the key characters that he played them last year. And Dennis Allen's a good defensive coach. So I'm a little bit more down because most weeks I'm high on Baker Mayfield.
Right.
Put him outside my top 12 this week.
Yeah, and Mike Evans, Marshawn Lattimore, that's a real matchup. Somebody in the chat had asked, do I bench Mike Evans? And I think in most scenarios you'd say no. I'd have to review whatever that question was because I think that's a fair point given that matchup over the history of their 2 careers, and it's been a long one now. We have enough data and sample size to kind of figure that out a bit more judiciously. So, hey, reminder to folks, if you're watching this on my Twitter, I guess, JB Fantasy Sports, or at Jim Coventry NFL, we also have a RotoWire YouTube channel. Technically, this video is live on the RotoWire NFL YouTube channel. We have content going up, it feels like hourly, but certainly daily at this point. We had Jim had talked about his sneaky starts as well. Juju Smith-Schuster was one of the prime examples of that last week. If you're able to capitalize on that, that's fantastic. I go over my 3 loves and 3 hates every single week. I think the hates have been a little bit off, but the loves, we've been getting at least a good job. I've been trying to target some lesser options just to give people in deeper leagues like myself and my 16 an option out there. So the RotoWire YouTube channel, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe this video, or at least would do a whole good for me. Jim's beautiful face has already covered plenty, so it's always helping out the view numbers if I get a few more likes this time. But it'd be awesome if you guys could do that. And again, we have a ton of different YouTube content out there. RotoWire Fantasy Football. So Somebody in the chat, and this is worth at least mentioning to me, because we didn't talk about the quarterbacks all that much. I'm going to pull it up. Kirk Cousins. Hold on 1 second here. Kirk Cousins or Fields this week. And again, Justin Fields still looks like he'll be the starter for the Steelers another week moving forward. I know the offense didn't look fantastic against the Cowboys on Sunday night, but Kirk Cousins, is that real? I don't think we're getting 500 passing yards every single week, but dare I say, think Kirk Cousins is not just a top 10 quarterback moving forward, but might sneak into my top 8 rest of season. Other than the Cowboys and Broncos, the Falcons have one of the easiest schedules rest of season from a passing perspective. So I like Kirk Cousins, and I think I'd take him over Justin Fields moving forward.
You know, Joe Bartel, I was getting a little bit nervous early in the season because I had Kirk Cousins as the top 12 quarterback for the season. I had him right there. I said, top 12 quarterback, you draft this quarterback 18, you play that game and it should work out. And then week 1 was terrible where he was like, in shotgun the whole game. It looks like he couldn't move. He is, like you said, 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. That's not happening again. Just understand that. But what he is doing is he's getting way more comfortable with his receivers. He's getting way more comfortable in the offense. And again, this game was an exaggeration against Tampa Bay, but Kirk Cousins has another beautiful matchup. Carolina's lost like everybody. They lost their linebackers. Josie Jewell's out. Shaq Thompson's done for the season. Even blitzing is going to be a problem for them. We know that Derek Brown, their great defensive end, is lost in week 1. There's nobody left. They have J.C. Horn and nobody. So basically, this is a game, and the only problem there could be for Kirk Cousins is if they get the running game on track, because it might be so easy to run on them, it might be one of those things where Cousins doesn't have to throw a lot. I'm still ranking him as a top 10 quarterback this week, though, because I think they will want to keep throwing the ball and at least balancing it. And I think he could get a lot done even on 25 attempts in this game. I have Justin Fields lower. I am not excited about, hey, look, Max Crosby, 2 sacks on a high ankle sprain last week after taking a week off. I know that defense isn't great, but I do think there's a lower scoring game. And I think Pittsburgh can use ball control in this game too. I don't think they're going to, and I think they play with a lead. So I don't think they have to air it out at all. I think they try to hide their quarterback when they can. And I think this is one of those games where they will. So I like Kirk Cousins pretty significantly here.
Well, let's play it back out for the Falcons offense. Drake London obviously had his breakout game. The yards after the catch was encouraging to see that somebody has liked Drake London for a long time. But the selling point for late first round, early second round was, at minimum, I know he can be a jump ball guy in an offense that's going to be passing a ton and has a good quarterback that can make the reads effectively. I'm assuming you're not going to see 63 points scored between the two teams this week in the Panthers and Falcons. And that's largely, I believe, the Panthers' fault in this equation. But even with J.C. Horn likely matched up on Drake London, this feels like a smash spot for Drake London. And dare I say, rest of season? Like, if I like Kirk Cousins rest of season, then it should be 1-for-1, other than Patrick Surtain. Again, the Broncos, I think, in week 12. Drake London should be a wheels up scenario the rest of the way in my mind.
Joe, early last week, again, if you follow our RotoWire content, I do buys and sells every week. Before that big game, London had, I said, like, buy, please buy Drake London. He didn't have a big game to that point. His biggest game was like 18 PPR points. And that, again, for what people were expecting, I go, buy him. The targets were 3, 7, 9, 12, and then he adds a 13 out of that. And that was with him missing a good chunk of time.
Yes.
He's getting evaluated for concussion. Drake London is a superstar. I mean, you know what? He's not the same player as Nico Collins, but you think about that archetype of player. He is the 2 high safety buster. He has that big body. He runs after the catch, not the speed of Nico Collins, but he can run with power and authority after the catch. And he is exactly the player that you want in a receiver in this 2 high shell league. And Kirk Cousins will keep leaning on him. And it's going to be a beautiful rest of the season for Drake London. This is where we projected in preseason. We were telling you to draft him that 1-2 turn in drafts because this is the guy he is. Again, last week balanced out some of the bad weeks, but at least he had scored. He scored in 3 of the last 4 games. So he hasn't been a bust at any point. Week 1 was bad, but he's been good every week since. But yes, wheels up all the way.
It's a gross mischaracteristic. So, Jim, you can pour every bit of water you need to on this statement. But watching that Thursday game, and I watched it back because I am heavily invested in Drake London and to a lesser extent Kirk Cousins, it felt a little bit Matthew Stafford, Cooper Cup-ish. You thought you saw 3 or 4 different choice routes where it was the one-to-one connection. Those are unguardable for the Rams, and I think that was my best case scenario, was that Drake London would have that rapport with a quarterback that knew how to make that throw and also make that read. It's just that no matter, you can, again, Patrick Surtain is the best corner in the league by far. I'm worried about the week 12 matchup. We're talking about a month and a half away. That's an unguardable thing if you have that chemistry, and Drake London mixing in the slot a little bit more too. I don't know. You were correct to call it a buy last week. I'll buy at the ceiling right now because I think Drake London looks darn good, and the Kirk Cousins offense is going to be pretty effective, I think, the rest of the way. Let's talk about another guy in the back end of the first round, early second round turn. That's somebody that's been inconsistent, Marvin Harrison. You have the Cardinals offense pull off a surprising win on the Niners last week. Kyler Murray's 50-yard run was certainly a beneficiary part of that. I will do a celebration at the end of the show, but the end of the show, Jim, will be like 8 minutes before we're done, because that's what Kyler Murray was doing in homage to Kyler Murray, celebrating 40 yards out on his touchdown run to start that game. I think it's going to be a get-right game for Marvin Harrison. Whether or not Jair Alexander will be healthy for that, I guess, matters a little bit. He's missed the last 2 weeks with a groin injury. Coincidentally, missed Justin Jefferson's explosion game. You saw the Jacob Whittington also do pretty good for the Rams last week, too. Even if Jair is out there, I think a guy like Marvin Harrison poses a big concern. And we talked about the 2 safety high buster. Marvin Harrison, archetype wise, big guy, fast, can catch the ball at the high point, is certainly kind of the key to unlock things. So where are you with Marvin Harrison this week?
You know, the production, other than that big week against the Rams in week 2, 4 for $130 and 2 touchdowns, it really hasn't been there. The targets the last week, 6 and 7, that's meh. So there's nothing great about that. Defenses are putting a lot of attention on him. Now, maybe the Packers won't do that, but I've seen defenses really focus on saying, we're not afraid of Michael Wilson. We're not afraid of Trey McBride. James Conner's great, but he's not a game breaker. So I really think that defenses are saying, you know what, let's take Harrison away and see what else happens. And it's not been great. And Kyler Murray may be the quarterback who's just saying, you know what, if he's getting that level of coverage, I'm just going to go elsewhere. And it's been successful enough. I mean, I obviously got, killed by Washington, but they've looked good. And Kyler Murray will run when he needs to run. So I think that maybe he's not going to force feed the ball to Marvin Harrison the way Daniel Jones is forcing it to Malik Neighbors.
Sure.
And I think that's a big, it's a big thing to consider here, because they certainly could have forced it his way against San Francisco, but they didn't.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Michael Wilson's a totally capable guy too. The only issue is, all right, I believe Marvin Harrison's going to go off as, well, I believe James Conner is going to go off, and then Kyler Murray is going to hit his rushing floor. There's a lot of those things. And yes, I'm a Packer fan. And when I say I'm a Packer fan, it always means, at least in my mind, I'm beyond pessimistic. I mean, if you watch any of Wisconsin sports, I'm allowed to be over the past 20 years. But yes, that's kind of the direction I'm going. I think Marvin Harrison will be fine. I think James Conner will be fine. I think there's going to be a lot of points. And yeah, I still think the Packers cover the 5-point spread right now. So maybe I'm just wrong on some part of this equation. We'll have to find out come Sunday what's going to happen in Lambeau. A reminder to folks, and if you like that over on the Kyler Murray rushing total, we do have a RotoWire Picks app out there. It offers recommendations and predictions for those fantasy pick'em sites and player props on platforms like Prize Picks, BetMGM, Underdog, a title sponsor for us, covering just about every sport, including esports, for example. It's free to download on the Apple and Android store. You sign up within the app, a subscription also unlocks all the features, and existing rotowire.com/DFS pick subscribers also get instant full access within their login. So check it out now. Search RotoWire Picks in the App Store. Again, I think you can mix in a little bit of Drake London stuff. You can mix in a little bit of Marvin Harrison stuff. Dare I say mix in Kyle Pitts, because we're talking about tight ends, Jim. If Kirk Cousins is going to be good and Drake London's going to be good, how is that 6-yard out coverable? Like, can you really put that Falcons offense genie back in the bottle? Because Kyle Pitts, 6-yard out, runs for another 6 yards. Oh, it's a first down. That was automatic against the Buccaneers, and they have a pretty good linebacking core, which you'd think would be able to cover that. I think Kyle Pitts is ready to have a wheels up scenario, but I've said that multiple times over his career, and everyone has been a disappointment. So where are you at with Kyle Pitts?
It's really, really tough, because Pitts had 8 targets last week. but he had more than 5 in a game. It was 3, 4, 5, 3. Targets were not there. The 8, and this was a high volume game. Obviously, they throw for 500 yards, so everybody eats, right? And they went into the game saying they were going to get Kyle Pitts more involved, and it was very clear early he was a focal point of the offense. Not as much as the game went on, though, right? When you got in the second half of that game, it was everybody else. It was London, Mooney, McLeod. Ray McLeod is the biggest detriment to Kyle Pitts because they're in a 3-receiver offense, and McLeod is playing almost every snap. His lowest snap rate in the last 4 weeks is 95%. It's either 98 or 100 in every other game. Week 1, he didn't play that much, but he is on the field, and he is drawing those targets in the middle of the field where you'd like to see your tight end. And so Ray McLeod is out targeting Kyle Pitts regularly, and it's and that's a problem because Darnell Mooney clearly has a great connection with Kirk Cousins. Mooney's been very fantasy viable. I mean, not just fantasy viable, he's been fantasy strong for week 2 on. So I just don't know what's going to be left for Kyle Pitts. That's a problem.
Yeah, I'm with you. Anytime you can get Ray McLeod involved at the expense of Kyle Pitts, you have to do it. I'm pausing for sincerity. Why are teams dumb? But Falcons hopefully turn things around, get Kyle Pitts involved more in the offense. We'll have to see. I had mentioned my bias with the Packers from a negative, but I'll also go to the positive here. I am very excited for Tucker Kraft. That's the kind of player that I want to have on my team. The kind of comments. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Tucker Kraft's game from a trash talking perspective. It's wild. It would be legitimately terrifying if I saw Tucker Kraft saying those things and talking those things to me on the football field and then completely running me over. It just gets me fired up as a fan to have that player on my team, but that doesn't mean his fantasy factor will be something that's impactful for the rest of the season. So I'm going to turn to you, a far less biased person when it comes to Tucker Kraft. What are you expecting him for him this week, but also rest of the season within the Packers offense?
Until the last 2 weeks, Tucker Kraft was not seeing many targets. He had 3, 2, and 3. His snap share was great. That snap share has been stable in 4 games. 4 to 5, he's played at least 80% of the snaps. It was 2 weeks ago, he had the 9-target game. But even last week, he goes off for 488 and 2 touchdowns. That was only on 5 targets. So the tight end position is always difficult because you don't know who's getting the ball. But look, Christian Watson's out. I don't know what is between the chemistry between Dontavian Wicks and his quarterback, but they have completed way less than half of the attempts that have gone to Wicks. They're not on the same page, and Wicks is dropping some passes too. So realistically, Musgrave is somebody who's like in the circle of trust right now. It's Jaden Reed.
Well, Tucker Kraft. Yeah, sorry, you said Musgrave. Tucker Kraft is in the circle.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, you're good.
Yeah, and Tucker Kraft, he's in the circle of trust now. And so, yeah, I think that you see him as a floor play. Any week he could just fall off. But right now, Romeo Doubs, who knows what's going on with him? He, suspended last week, complaining about his role in the offense. So maybe for the near future, maybe Tucker Kraft really becomes a secondary, a solid secondary weekly option. But you're definitely rostering him. You're definitely counting him as a top 12 tight end. And are the touchdowns repeatable? Maybe, maybe not. But I think in this offense, they can score plenty of points. So, yeah, you roll them out there and you say, you know what? I play him over Kyle Pitts. Why not?
Yeah, so it's an easy call in my mind, Tucker Kraft over Mark Andrews. You wouldn't have guessed that. And maybe this week against the Commanders, it's a little bit different. But rest of season, whatever you're getting for Tucker Kraft, consistency is going to be a factor. You're playing over Tyler Conklins of the world, probably even David Njoku, given how bad Deshaun Watson is. Dalton Schultz, maybe now with Nico Collins out, it's a different equation, but they're the Patriots this week. But that's really kind of it. Because it's the George Kittles of the world. George Kittle does that and is in a better offense. It's more consistent. Evan Ingram, you'd assume, gets more involved once he's back healthy. Dallas Goedert, probably the same way. Freiermuth is the second receiver. I mean, it's the same sort of concept, but just in a worse offense with the Steelers. So Tucker Kraft is probably tight end 10, 11, which is good. That's an important thing that we found a startable tight end 11 where we didn't have that for the first month of the year. But you look at those 2 touchdowns. One was a very schemed, wide open play. Luke Musgrave had those happen last year. This was a reverse of that where it's a 17-yard hidden motion sort of. He's open and then does stuff after the catch. And then the other touchdown was a designed screen pass in the red zone, which he does for what Matt LaFleur does for the tight ends. But it wasn't like, oh, Jordan Love is looking for Tucker Kraft. That's part of the beauty of the Packers offense, is that Matt LaFleur really is the puppeteer in this, calling the things for Jordan Love to find the most open guys. And they've been wide open often. And then the brilliance of Jordan Love making a throw or two that gets a guy open. That's the other part of this. So I love Tucker Kraft for what he does for my team. Fantasy wise, it will be inconsistent like most of those tight ends in that range. But at this point, he's certainly worth rostering and playing if you have him, because you probably don't have better options if that's the case. So,
Joe, you made a comment about Mark Andrews in there. I want to clarify something to the audience. Mark Andrews, in the last 4 games, there were 2 games where he had goose eggs. And in those games, the Ravens threw 33 passes. One of the games, because they were just running it down their opponent's throats. And in one of those games, of the 18 attempts by the quarterback, Lamar Jackson, 9 of those went to Justice Hill and Derrick Henry. But in the 2 games that bookended that, Mark Andrews had at least 50 yards in both games. When they throw, he's becoming a part of the offense again, but in the weeks they're going to run the ball down their opponent's throat, and that's going to be really difficult to predict. So that's the tough thing with Andrews right now, but we're going to remember those goose eggs well. But like I said, this week, if they run the ball down Washington's throats, they might not throw, because we've already seen they're willing to not throw the ball. So that makes it really tough. I just wanted to share it with the audience, because Andrews is still good, but he's very game flow dependent now.
Yeah, and we'll have to see. I mean, this is going to be a real test for Cliff Kingsbury. I wrote this in my big betting sheet. Will be posted later. Like, Jaden Daniels has been excellent. I'm absolutely wrong on what I thought Jaden Daniels would be at this portion of his career. I'm wanting better quarterbacks, more young quarterbacks to look good. I want Jaden Daniels to be successful. So I'm deciding that Jaden Daniels is the guy, even though I was not anywhere close to that entering the year. But Cliff Kingsbury, I'm still out on. And this will be a real test against that Ravens defense that certainly has name brand, has the veterans that can do things, but hasn't looked all that good. This should be a layup for the Ravens. Should be. But we'll have to see. This is the first real test for Cliff Kingsbury in Act 2, I guess 3 of his NFL career. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
The top of the hour, actually, when we're off this show, I'm going on the bookies.com YouTube page, and we're going to do our picks. The Ravens are going to be one of my picks. I'm going to break that game down a little bit, but I think the Ravens blow out the Commanders here. Terry McLaurin, we didn't talk about him in the rankings, and that's fine. I have him lower than usual. This is the first time that he's going to see a safety actually over the top. Because the last 3 games, he's been basically running with either late safety help or no safety help, and there's going to be a safety over the top. So those easy throws to him probably aren't going to be there. That's going to be real interesting.
Yeah, that's good. I want to make sure I give you time for that. Again, reminder to folks that Jim will be answering as many start set questions as he can over that 2-hour period on Sunday morning. So if we didn't get to any of your questions or any of your trade stuff, the trade stuff in particular, I know that sometimes it can be urgent. You can definitely message Jim on Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL, or myself, I think to a lesser extent if you want to, JB Fantasy Sports as well. But we'll let Jim get off running. And thanks everyone for listening. We had almost over 500 live viewers, at least on the YouTube channel. Appreciate all the love and support. If you can like the video, that'd be great as well too. But we'll be back in this time next week for more of Jim's weekly rankings. Thanks everyone for listening.